I would like to respectfully acknowledge that I'm hosting today's webinar on the ancestral unceded territory of the Ktunaxa and Secwamic peoples. I'm grateful to be able to live, work, and play on this land. My job with Ecosk allows me to travel through the East Kootenays and see the beauty that has been preserved throughout time. I love the strong mountains and the abundance of lakes and rivers that I get to enjoy while paddleboarding, fishing, or just reading a good book by the water's edge. I moved to this area 3 years ago, and I have made a home here, but I do not take this land for granted. I work towards reconciliation by working together with the Ktunaxa and Secwamic peoples to protect the native ecosystems and teach the full history of the land I have the privilege of being on. My name is Cassidy, and I am one of the 2 invasive species education outreach assistants this summer for the East Kootenay Invasive Species Council. I grew up in Victoria, BC, and moved to Cranbrook for my post-secondary education. I just graduated with a Bachelor's of Education from the University of Victoria's off-campus East Kootenay Teacher Education Program. My goal is to use my degree to teach in an elementary classroom using a holistic approach to learning. My passion is in outdoor education and finding ways to incorporate play into learning. Here is an overview of how today's webinar will flow. We'll start with a brief look at who is Ecosk, then move on to the Invasives 101, where we will learn the essentials of what is an invasive species. This will lead us into the topic of teaching youth about invasive species. We will explore when and how to approach this topic, followed by tips and tricks for teaching invasives in an engaging way that is tailored to your students. I will wrap up by summarizing the activities and resources I referenced throughout the webinar that you can use to support your teaching. Then we'll have time at the end for questions. This will be the time you can turn on your mic to ask a question, or you can drop it in the chat at any time throughout the webinar. So, as I mentioned before, I'm an Education and Outreach Assistant for the East Kootenay Invasive Species Council, or ECISC for short. ECISC is a regional nonprofit organization that works to mitigate the negative environmental, social, and economic impacts of invasive species. We go about mitigating invasive species in a variety of different ways. We use social media and a monthly e-newsletter to bring awareness to local invaders. We work with land managers to coordinate management of invasives, and we host webinars, outreach booths, and courses to educate and prevent the spread of invasive species. ECISC is split up into 2 general types of work. The education and outreach crew, which is where I fit in, goes around the East Kootenays hosting and attending events that fit into our messaging. This year, my teaching partner Alyssa and I have been part of training for BC Park Student Rangers, run lessons at local elementary and middle schools, co-hosted community weed polls with different organizations, and run outreach booths at farmers markets and boat launches. Our goal is to get people talking about invasive species because the more we know, the better choices we can make for our environment. On the flip side of ECISC is our field crew. They are boots on the ground working towards managing the spread of invasives. The field crew does inventory to collect data on which invasives are in the area and does treatment and control using a variety of methods, including mechanical, chemical, cultural, and biological. You know, Alyssa and I, we tagged along one day when the summer field crew was doing villager samplings, and let me tell you, this crew, they work really hard, but they also manage to have a lot of fun when they do it. So, what is an invasive species? An invasive species is an organism that has been introduced to an environment where it is not naturally found. These organisms are typically introduced by people either accidentally or intentionally. Now, not all introduced species are classified as invasive. An invasive species is both introduced in the area and it's causing harm to the economy, our environment, or our society. Some examples of economic harm include damaging crops, harming industries like forestry, fishing, or tourism, and some invasives like Japanese knotweed can even damage infrastructure. Some examples of harm to the environment include invasive species outcompeting the native species, altering habitats, introducing diseases, and altering the food chains. Some examples of harm to society include impacting recreational activities like biking, hiking, or boating, or affecting human health. Some invasive species are toxic if ingested, or can have mild effects like itching or more severe skin irritations like large burns. An example of this is wild parsnip. If you get this plant sap on your skin, it will cause large blisters of burns when the sap is exposed to the sun. So here are the 4 key terms in order to help classify our invasive species. So first, we have our native species, which are species that naturally occur in a specific geographic region. So for example, yarrow is native to the East Kootenays. Then we have invasive species, which is a species that is introduced to an area and it's causing harm to either the environment, economy, or society, or a combination of all 3. There are also introduced species, which are a species that is brought into an area and is living outside its native range. The big difference between an invasive versus an introduced species is that invasive species are causing harm to people, places, or profit. Finally, another word that can cause some confusion when learning about invasives is the term weeds. A weed is simply a plant that is growing where it is not wanted. This can be red clover that's growing on a golf course that is supposed to be all green, or a stray flower that is found in your garden and you don't want it there. A weed is not necessarily an invasive species. We are going to play a quick game to further explore invasives in our area. This is something you can use in a classroom as a warm-up activity or a wrap-up. I will be sending out slideshows with the resources following this webinar. And you can use it to play the game. This game is called Invasive Yay or Nay. I will show a picture of an organism, and it's your job to guess, is it invasive or not? If you believe it is invasive, you can drop a thumbs down in the comment, or if you're not really an emoji person, you can just kind of say, no, not invasive, or thumbs down, or no, it's invasive. If you believe it is non-invasive, you can say thumbs up or yay, non-invasive. So those will be plants that are either introduced or native to the area. If you were to use this game in a classroom setting, I recommend having kids move to vote. So this could be stand up if it's invasive, sit down if it's native, move to the left side of the room, move to the right side of the room, stand on 1 foot. You have the chance to be really creative with your options here, and it gives kids a chance to not be sitting still for as long and to be moving and getting their blood flowing. You can even have the kids choose the actions to get them involved. So we're going to get started. Remember, thumbs up means it's native or it's introduced. Thumbs down means you think it is invasive. So our first one, here we have a dandelion. I'm going to give about 30 seconds for you to answer, and you can play at home as well. Yeah, so our dandelion is an introduced species. He is not native. This one can be tricky because they grow everywhere. This species is introduced, but it does not fall into any of the categories of causing harm to the economy, ecosystem, or society. I have a lot of people asking me, so should we pull this plant? Your property, it's absolutely your call on what species you want growing there. But if it's growing in a forest or a field, I'd recommend leaving the dandelions alone because they're competing with the seed bank. And if we pull them, an invasive species could grow in its place. Dandelion is a great example of a plant that's a weed, but it's not invasive. All right, good job if you got it right. A little pat on the back, and let's keep going. Our next species here is the goldfish. All right, yeah, that is correct. Our goldfish is an invasive species. This can be a bit tricky question. A goldfish in your tank at home, he's chill. They're pets and lovely and non-invasive. But if that goldfish is let loose into a local pond or lake, they are absolutely invasive. They eat a lot and outcompete the native species for food, space, and habitat. All right, our next one here is oxeye daisy. I'm going to drop a quick reminder. We're saying invasive is thumbs down, native or introduced would be thumbs up. Or awesome. So yes, our oxeye daisy is an invasive species. These daisies can be found growing in disturbed areas like roadsides, pastures, and grasslands. This flower spreads quickly and has seeds that can last in the soil. This competition can reduce native plants in the area and create less grazing space for cattle and wildlife. All right, our next species here is fireweed. What do we think? Invasive, native, introduced? So yes, fireweed is a native species. I wanted to bring attention to this particular native species in the East Kootenays because it is one that I like to say it kind of grows like a weed. This species is found in disturbed areas and thrives after fires, along roadsides and ditches, and in open forests. A lot of our invasive species have similar characteristics and are opportunistic and they thrive in a disturbed area, but not every plant growing in a disturbed area is invasive. Okay, our final one for the day is the bachelor button. I just want to say I saw in the comments someone said so pretty it can't be, and I feel that wholeheartedly in my soul. But bachelor button, yes, it is an invasive species. I'm really sorry, gardeners. I know this one can be a fan favorite for growing in gardens. It is beautiful, it's easy to grow, and it fills in space really well. But yes, it is classified as invasive. They produce large amounts of seeds and can escape gardens to grow in meadows, fields, and grasslands. Fun fact, or maybe not so fun, but still kind of cool. There are still over 20 invasive species that are sold in garden centers, especially in wildflower mixes. This is why it is so important to know what you are growing and to read those seed mixes carefully. A fun activity that you can do with your class or your kids is to collect seed packs and you can research what each plant is, and then you can graph the percentage of native, invasive, and introduced species in each seed pack. For example, the one I have on the slides here, I created my own seed pack so I could kind of control the species in it, but you could use either seed packs you make yourself, or for real world results, you can use real seed packs. All right, so this leads us nicely into what we are truly here for today, which is youth education. When I was getting my Bachelor of Education, I read a research article on my course on teaching science that has stuck with me. In this article, David Sobel talked about the concept of ecophobia and how scaring children into appropriate environmental behavior is flawed. This article's main focus was on developmentally appropriate approaches for teaching global warming, but it made me wonder about invasive species. I was stuck on this concept of negativity being used as a teaching tool and how there are just more effective ways of teaching. We're approaching a topic that can so easily slip into good versus bad plants, but that is not the goal. Every invasive species in the East Kootenays is a native plant somewhere else, and a lot of our precious natives are invasive elsewhere in the world. So my goal is to change that mindset from these plants are bad plants to these are plants growing in the right place. So how do we teach about invasive species in a way that connects children to nature and encourages responsible environmental behaviors and sustainable choices? I've taken this question and broken my research into 4 tips to set kids on the right path. So my first tip here is to get kids outside. Now, this is not exactly groundbreaking information, but it's so important. The first step in teaching invasive species is to get kids immersed in nature. Spend time outside, ask questions, make observations, and develop a love for the outdoors. Free play is a great way to immerse in nature, but there are plenty of activities you can use to encourage this development. Things like scavenger hunts, walking around with ID books or the Seek app, or just going on a nature walk. When I go on nature walks with my partner, he is so much faster than me. So to slow him down, we play a game where we count how many different types of flowers we spot on our hike. This is a great way to increase engagement and just focus on the outdoors. One of my university professors had us go outside and sit in one spot and just doodle or write. This was a great way to engage with our creativity and enjoy the beauty of the outdoors. We are very fortunate in the East Kootenays to live so close to nature. There are parks and green areas walking distance to all of the schools I personally have had a privilege of teaching at so far. So we should take advantage. Bringing kids outside is a great way to develop a love for the outdoors, and kids are more likely to protect the things they love. I think of the Dr. Seuss quote, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. The best way to nurture kids who care is to spend quality time enjoying the outdoors as frequently as possible. One of my favorite activities you can do to have focused time outside is to get paint samples and see if you can find these colors in nature. Your kid is never too young to immerse in nature. In fact, on one of the community weed polls we hosted with ECOS this year, we had someone bring their baby. And it was really cool to see people starting out young and just bringing kids outside and enjoying the nature. All right, my next tip is to use the big words. When we are teaching children about invasive species, or any scientific topic for that matter, use the big vocabulary terms right away. You may need to follow up with an explanation on what that word means, but using these scientific terms is beneficial to language development and later recognition of a concept. I read this article, which I've linked to the bottom of the page, called Shared Reading and Science Vocabulary for Kindergarten Kids. And it states that although children will learn many words incidentally, decades of research findings have established that the most effective approach to helping kids learn academic vocabulary involves explicitly teaching selected words and providing students multiple opportunities to encounter and work with these new words. So, do not be worried that the word is too big for a child. This is underestimating the kid and ultimately a disservice. An activity to help support this language development is to bring invasive species ID books outside and read a passage out loud. You could alternatively try using the Seek app because they also have the same kind of little passage once you scan a plant. I suggest turning this into a routine that you do once a week or once a month with your class. And if you have older students, you can even have them eventually start to pick out a plant and read it instead and take ownership of this learning. So with me here, I just have the invasive plants of the crown of the continent. And just in the first little summary on the page in Dame's rocket, it says, biennials, or short-lived perennials native to Eurasia, cultivated in other areas of the world for their attractive spring-blooming flowers. In some of these areas, it has escaped from cultivation and become a weed species. Just in this short little sentence, there's lots of options for vocabulary words you can start to explicitly teach with your students. So we have biennial, perennial, the term native, cultivated. And if you continue to do this as a routine weekly or monthly, you're going to begin to see your kids start to use that language more often and be more comfortable with the terminology. My next tip number 3, is to use hands-on activities. So talking about invasive species is important, but so is experiential learning. Experiential learning, or active learning, is the process of learning by doing. Active learning is beneficial because it provides students with an opportunity to think about, talk about, and process course materials, and creates personal connections to the material for students, which increases their motivation to learn. Some great hands-on activities to teach invasive species include tag games to stimulate the spread. So ECUS has adapted and created 2 tag games in specific. So Invader Tag and Basic Needs, which are 2 of the games I will be sending out following this webinar, but you can also find them on the ECUS website. And in these games, we start with the students acting as a native ecosystem. Then an invasive species is introduced to the area and begins to outcompete the native species by tagging them. Students can see how in a limited space, the native population will decrease as invasives take over the area. Another great way to actively learn about invasive species is to host a weed poll. Educators can reach out to ECUS to book us to come in to do a weed poll, or you have the option of our rentable weed kits. And then my 4th tip is to focus on the joy. Kids learn much more when they're learning about something they're passionate about. If your students love to fish, focus on invasive fish. If your students love to dance, have them sit and watch how a plant moves and then create a dance based on the movements of the invasive species. So draw pictures, write stories, create plays, allow the child to lead their own learning by providing choices. This can be challenging to do in a classroom where every kid has their own unique interests and passions, but a good way to encourage them to learn about what they love is to do small groups or stations to provide these choices. This is also a great time for free play to come into effect because there's so much creativity happening within that free play, and the students are doing something that they really care about, which means they're more likely to want to talk about those activities to their parents later and to share their learning. All right, so to wrap up, when teaching invasive species, try to find ways to get outside, use scientific language regardless of the age, use hands-on experiences and activities, and adapt activities to your students' passions. These tips will help to create engagement and hopefully lead to long-term protectors of our ecosystem. Throughout the webinar, I've been throwing out activity ideas you can try, which I have posted on the slide that is up right now. In the next week, I'll be sending out the list of the suggested activities, along with some downloadable content and links to games and activities I recommend trying. The activities listed with a star before them are the ones I will be sending out to those of you who have registered. More teacher resources can also be found on the ECUS and the Invasive Species Council BC websites. I recommend checking them out if you're listening from If you're listening from outside the East Kootenays, I recommend finding your local Invasive Species Council for more of the information. I just wanted to say thank you everyone for listening today. I greatly appreciate your time and support. If you have any If you're interested in learning more about what ECUS does, I have all our social media posted on the slide, and we also have our outreach at ecus.com email. Feel free to email us with any questions you have or anything you're interested in doing with us. The email goes directly to our ECUS manager, Brittany, and she will happily direct you to the right place to further support you. So keep your eyes open for an email from me with downloadable resources. And remember, the most important part of teaching invasive species is to get outside and play. With a healthy love of the outdoors, the learning will come with time and interest.